have to put up with my stopped-up nose today. I tell you, one of the things about taking 70 children home from school in the school bus in the afternoon and about 50 in the mornings is constant, wonderful exposure to germs. And so I have many times a little kindergartner will come up to me, Mr. Powers, I want to tell you something. I say, well, what is it? My mom says I might have strep throat. I say, well, that's so nice. Thank you for coming and breathing on me. Now go back and breathe on all your friends. So I think I've had a cold for about a month, and it's probably not the same cold. It's Johnny's cold, and Susan's cold, and everybody else on the bus is cold. But I have one today, and it just continues. It's good to have you here today. If you are family who's returned or visitors today, proud you're with us. Now, you recognize this little device on the screen here, and I happen to have one in my pocket. It's a fidget spinner. And man, these things are cool because once you start them, they just keep on going and keep on going. And I used to think that this was kind of an American pastime of kids. You've seen these, I'm sure. If you've been around kids, you have. And they keep on going and going. And I thought it was kind of an American thing until we saw a box of them. We were in Venice in May, and they were selling them there too. So they're all over the world, everywhere you go. I've seen enough of these around on my bus that I have thought about asking my kids to roll the windows down and stick their fidget spinners out, and I think we would take off and fly around the town with all these propellers going. But they're kind of cool. And the thing that's neat about them is they just keep on going and they keep on going because they're perfectly balanced. And because of the balance that they have, they don't slow down. They keep on going long past what you would think they should, even without giving them a new push. Now today we're going to spend this morning particularly talking about something in the life of Jesus that I think perfectly and beautifully illustrates his balance and the way that we marvel at him because Jesus can be equally balanced in being completely merciful on one side and perfectly judging in his other side. And these two things live and walk together with such great balance in Jesus. And we're going to look today in John chapter 8 at Jesus forgiving the woman caught in the act of adultery. And if we were to misread this, we might think, well, Jesus does not ever judge someone for sins, but is always looks the other way with sin. And that would be unbalanced. Or we might have expected Jesus to come in on that scene and have really been harsh with the woman and very judging of her, which would have been the other extreme of Jesus. But instead we find balanced in this beautiful way that only Jesus can do and one that we want to do, this balance between mercy and judgment, where in the beginning of this chapter we find Jesus with the woman not condemning her and showing her great mercy, but then spending the rest of the chapter in a discourse with the Pharisees, telling them that he has the authority to judge that's been given to him by his Father. Both are a part of Jesus and his nature. It's what we marvel at about him. Now this happens, as Luke 21 tells us, as every day he was teaching in the temple, but at night he went out and lodged on the mount called Olivet, and early in the morning all the people came to him in the temple to hear him. Now I want you to think about this setting because it is in this setting where Jesus is sitting and he's teaching the people in the temple that the Pharisees catch this woman in the very act of adultery, and they bring her right from the act and thrust her down in front of Jesus and this crowd. And they say, here's what Moses says for us to do. What are you going to do? John chapter 8, beginning in verse 1. Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. Early in the morning he came again to the temple, and all the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in adultery, and placing her in the midst, they said to him, Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery. Now in the law of Moses, we are commanded to stone such a woman. What do you say? This they said to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger on the ground. And as they continued to ask him, he stood up and said to them, Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her. And once more he bent down and wrote on the ground. But when they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the older ones. And Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. Jesus stood up and said to her, Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? And she said, No one, Lord. And Jesus said, Neither do I condemn you. Go, and from now on sin no more. Again Jesus spoke to them, saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. And so the Pharisees said to him, You're bearing witness about yourself, and your testimony is not true. Jesus answered, Even if I do bear witness about myself, my testimony is true. For I know where I came from and where I am going, but you do not know where I come from, nor where I am going. You judge according to the flesh. I judge no one. Now, we're going to look at this tonight because Jesus says here he judges no one. And later down in verse, I believe it's 24 or 25, he says that he comes to judge. Verse 16, Yet even if I do judge, my judgment is true, for it is not I alone who judge, but I and the Father who sent me. Now, here's a picture that shows kind of perhaps maybe what the scene would have looked like. Imagine Jesus here. I like this one. It's simple. It shows Jesus just sitting among the people, and he's teaching them. And suddenly, in the midst of this, the Pharisees burst forward with this woman, and they throw her down in great humiliation in front of Jesus and the crowd. The setting of this text is the temple. He's sitting with the people, and the teaching is disrupted by the scribes who thrust the woman into their midst, it says in verse 3. Here then is going to be the outline for today's lesson. Mercy and judgment. To test him, wrote with his finger the older ones and the light of the world. First, mercy and judgment. As I begin this lesson, I want to reemphasize that Jesus perfectly embodies the unconditional, unjudging, merciful love and the holy, divine righteousness that holds men accountable for unrepented sin. He is both perfectly in balance. It would be a grave misunderstanding of this passage to conclude that Jesus was indifferent about the woman's sin. To the contrary, Jesus knew all too well the darkness of sin, but he wanted to save her. Jesus' goal always is to save. His agenda is always for men's salvation and redemption. Jesus always wants for us to obey him and to love him. He wants us to be redeemed and to be saved. It's why he came. It's why he endured life in the flesh as a man. It's why he endured suffering on a cross to die and shed his blood. All these things he did for love of his Father and for love of us. And so as Jesus is going around in his ministry, he's looking for people to save. He's looking for people to rescue. He's looking for people who are open to the gospel and to convince those who are not open to be open to the gospel. And such is his mission for us. As he works in our lives, it is for our redemption. It is for our salvation. Even the tests that come into our lives are there before us to mature us, to wake us up, to save us. Jesus uses in the event of the adulterous woman to demonstrate to us love, mercy, and judgment. The woman is not judged now, and she is forgiven and told to go and sin no more. Judgment is delayed. She will only be judged later at the end of her life. And as John 3:17 says, Jesus did not come in the flesh to condemn the world, but to save it. And I want you to consider that during the time that Jesus was dealing with people who were alive, his ministry had as its theme mercy and salvation. Judgment comes later. And I want you to just consider the idea that during this time that we are alive now, the theme in which we live is God's mercy. Right now it's about mercy. It's about forgiveness. It is about loving us. Judgment will come. Judgment is delayed. Now that should give us cause to feel very blessed. It should also give me cause to judge other people or to interact with other people by mercy. Because I've been forgiven so much, because I've received mercy, knowing that judgment will come, God's judgment, Christ's judgment, but it is delayed. It also should give us a great amount of urgency. And we realize that this time that we have that is ruled by mercy is a short time, and that others need to be exposed to and understand Christ's great love for them. So during our lives, we receive love and merciful help from the Son of Man. At the end of our lives, when everything is taken into account, we receive judgment. While Jesus also disapproves of the woman's actions in committing adultery, he still loves the woman herself. We've looked at that a lot in this series of lessons, and maybe we can just re-emphasize it here. We will be totally different in the way we live life if we will value people according to the value of their souls rather than what we see on the outside of the person. It will change everything about the way we live, the way we interact with people, the way we make predetermined judgments on people. Christ looks at what is valuable in the person. It is their soul. And as Jesus comes upon this woman who's obviously being manipulated and abused by people who have no interest in judgment at all, no interest in doing what's right, they only have an interest in trapping Jesus, which is our next point. Jesus looks at the woman and he wants to save her. He doesn't wink at her sin, but he loves her heart. Number 2. By the way, we'll look more at mercy and judgment tonight, to test him. The Bible is very clear in verse 6. This they said to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. They have no interest in mercy, no interest in judgment. They have really no interest in the woman. They do not bring the equally guilty man. They only have interest in destroying Jesus. They said to him, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in the very act of adultery." The Old Testament law really was clear in this matter. The punishment was to be rendered in this way. Deuteronomy 22 and verse 22. If a man is found lying with the wife of another man, both of them shall die, the man who lay with the woman and the woman. You shall purge evil from Israel. Deuteronomy 17, 6 and 7, the hand of the witness shall be the first against him to put him to death. So the reason Jesus says, let him who was without sin cast the first stone, is this was the way the law was to be followed. Okay, you condemned her, first person who's the witness can throw the first stone. So you shall purge evil from your midst. But this was not an attempt to obey the law. And Jesus, who knows the hearts of all men, could look right through and see this for what it really was. It was not an attempt to be righteous. It was not an attempt to purge evil from Israel. This was a trap. They saw a way to destroy Jesus. Jesus saw a woman whose life was being destroyed. Number 3. He wrote with his finger. Now, many have tried to put forward guesses as to what Jesus was writing. The Bible doesn't say, so that's exactly what they remain, guesses. But one ancient manuscript does add, he wrote on the dust the sins of each one of them. And with this in mind, it is understandable why the oldest ones walked away first. Why? Their lists were longer. And perhaps it is when we count the sins that we have been forgiven that we become more merciful towards others. Writing even 2 letters in the normal way was not permitted by Jewish law on the Sabbath, but writing with or in the sand was permitted. And by writing in this way, Jesus demonstrated eloquently that he knew very well the law and knew the law said, "Thou shalt not commit adultery." They saw only the blackness of her past. He thought in terms of her future. Sin no more. They were eager to stone her, and he was eager to save her. James, in James 2:13 from the ESV, says this very pointed verse, "For judgment is without mercy to one who has shown no mercy. Mercy triumphs over judgment." I would suggest to you that if you have to make a choice between mercy and judgment, mercy triumphs over judgment. God will judge. Christ will judge. His judgment will be perfect. And when the time comes of his second coming, there will be no corruption in his judging. It will all be done as it should be, with perfection. Number 4, the older ones. The older ones. The older people leave first, realizing that they are grave blemishes on their conscience, which would prohibit them from throwing a stone. I like the King James Version in this one the best, I think. "And they which heard it, being convicted by their own consciences, went out one by one, beginning with the eldest, even unto the last, and Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in their midst." Can you imagine the silence of that moment? Some moments just really draw in. You know, if you see something, it's unexpected, everyone's watching, everyone kind of leaning into the moment. It probably was one of those pin drop hearing moments where it was totally and completely quiet. Everybody's trying to see, what is Jesus writing? What is he putting on there? What is he doing? And as they all crowd around and try to look and to see, and it's quiet, in their hearts something spectacular is going on. The crowd is quiet, but their hearts are not quiet, because their hearts are considering and thinking about this moment and what are they going to do. And then you can just hear rocks falling to the ground as men drop them and go off one by one. But the older ones go off first, being convicted by their own consciences and understanding how much God had to forgive them. No stones are thrown. Such is the moral perfection of Jesus that his mere presence underlines to all how sinful they themselves are. Jesus' tenderness with the woman illustrates his concern for one lost soul. And if we do find a uniqueness to the Gospel of John, it is Jesus' interaction with individuals. Matthew brings forth the great scenes of crowds of people that Jesus taught and preached to. And we're so thankful for those because they give us sermons like the Sermon on the Mount. But John shows us the interaction with one person, like a Nicodemus, or a woman at the well, or a man who's an invalid by the pool of Siloam, or this woman. Everyone else leaves, and he's just there talking with her and visiting with her and trying to encourage her to leave her life of sin and to forgive her and give her a second chance. Aren't you thankful that God judges us or gives us right now by the standard of mercy? That He gives us less punishment than we deserve, that He forgives us, that He allows us to start over. And I think about this moment today. We had many things we're thankful for: turkey, food, family. But aren't we most thankful for God's mercy upon us? Aren't we most thankful that we can leave here today with having had another opportunity to start over and to change and to be forgiven and to walk out of here cleansed with a clear conscience? It's a blessing that is the greatest of all Thanksgiving themes. Finally, the light of the world. I want you to think about the light of the world, which, by the way, is a constant consideration in the book of John. But notice then here at the end in verse 12, we have these words. Jesus spoke to them saying, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." Let's set this verse in the context for just a moment. Why here? Why in this location? Why did John put this here? Why say it here? Why at the conclusion of this forgiveness of the woman who was caught in the act of adultery, told to go and sin no more? Think of it this way. Here it is, if Jesus is saying, you can choose a different path than this woman has chosen. You can choose a path of light. I am light, and I offer an alternative to moral, political, and religious corruption. Think about what's just happened. Everything about it was corrupt from the beginning. The sin of the woman was corrupt, and the whole intentions of the Pharisees was corrupt. Everything was corrupt about it. It's all darkness. And therefore Jesus says, I am the light of the world. Don't live in darkness any longer. I offer an alternative to life. This doesn't bring happiness. It's darkness. This doesn't bring joy. This doesn't bring purpose. And the message for us is that the only purposeful life that brings joy to us, that is an opportunity for great thanksgiving in our lives, is to walk in the light. To walk in Jesus. It's an alternative lifestyle. To appreciate the joy of light, it is helpful to consider the dread of darkness. In darkness, there is stumbling. In darkness, there is fear. In darkness, there is disorientation. In darkness, there is danger. I rarely stump my toe in the light when compared with how often I do it in the dark. How did that clothes hamper get between me and the bathroom at night? How did it get there? It was dark, I didn't see it. And when we understand the peril of darkness and the lostness of a world without the light, it makes us appreciate so much more the light. In his preamble, his beginning words, John wrote in verses 6 through 9 of chapter 1, "There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to bear witness about the light, that all might believe through him. The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world." And here he is, the light, Jesus, who comes into darkness, where people think they're fulfilled, where they think they're happy, where they think they have purpose, and offers them the true light, which really gives happiness and peace and joy. Today, Jesus offers to each of us a pardon for sin, a second chance, a fresh start. He stands ready to help and not to judge. Judgment will come. He is the perfect balance of mercy and judgment. Wouldn't it be better for us today to respond to the mercy of Jesus rather than wait and respond to his eternal judgment? If you'd like to respond this morning, please come as we stand and sing.